The author of Harper's letter that we told you about last week admitted that The Intercept's Glenn Greenwald was kept from signing the magazine's missive calling for a fair and open discourse, mostly because the signatories opposed some of Glenn's views. Let's take a listen.
LGBTQ people that we saw. Did you consider asking him on? I don't know if that's too private.
Bernie Sanders?
No, sorry. Oh, no. That would have been amazing. Yeah, I know.
That would have been amazing.
Glenn Greenwald.
Yeah, we did. I would have had him on. Interestingly enough, he's become someone in the past few months that I've interacted with quite a bit on Twitter, and it's been cool. We really, but like, I was outvoted on that one.
Interesting. You see, this is interesting because I assume some of the reasons that you were outvoted on that was because of some of his things that were considered beyond the pale.
Glenn, of course, responded to that revelation on Twitter, calling the letter signatories frauds, eager to protect their own status, not the principles of free speech. Journalist and friend of the show and signatory of that letter, Zaid Jilani, joins us now to discuss this whole back and forth. Always great to see you, Zaid.
Good to see you, Zaid.
Good to be here.
So basically the idea here is that Glenn was blocked from signing the letter because, I mean, he's been outspoken on any number of issues, maybe, most prominently on Russiagate. And so on a letter that's calling for free speech and debate, apparently his views were seen as too beyond the pale by some of the signatories. What did you make of that?
Yeah, that was really interesting what Thomas kind of revealed there. Given that, I had seen many different critiques of the letter. Most were not really persuasive. Probably the most persuasive one I've seen was that it seemed like many signatories of the letter leaned one way politically. And I didn't know very much about how they did the process of actually recruiting people to sign it. I just know that, I was handed a text. I said, okay, sure, I'm going to sign it. But I didn't really know who else was signing it or how they were finding people. So when Thomas revealed this, I thought that was a real shame because Glenn kind of is the Platonic ideal of the letter, right? He is someone who will argue with you until 4 a.m. at night, but at the same time, he will never. I've never seen him ask anyone to get, to shut up, to stop debating, to censor them, to deplatform them, so on and so forth. I've never seen him be in favor of any of that. He's a real free speech absolutist, and he really strongly believes in debate. Ever since he was a blogger, I think in the early 2000s on his little weblog back when he wasn't so famous. So I think Glenn really would have been an ideal signatory. And having someone like him alongside many people on that list who are antagonists of his, like David Frum, I think would have sent a powerful message. So I really don't know why this happened. And I don't know who it is who on the list objected to him being there, but it seems like it was a real mistake.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Zed, is that Wesley Yang actually had a tweet, which I read to Matt Taibbi, and he concurred with, which was about how, at the end of the day, the signature problem, one of the things with this letter, is that if this had actually been about, let's say, Russiagate, and about the media's failings, about that investigation, the media coverage on that in particular, they would not have been able to garner many of the signatures that they ultimately were. But that Russiagate was really the beginning of the media and others kind of buying and wish-casting a narrative without any real critical scrutiny. And the fact that Glenn's Russiagate reporting was what made it, or criticism really, and reporting, was what made him out beyond the pale for many of these signatories. What does that actually tell us about the motivations of some of the people who tried to shut him down?
Well, do we know for a fact that it was Russiagate, or is that just like how we kind of implied?
I don't think we know for sure.
Yeah, that's a fair.
Seems
but I mean,
possible, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of this is, so the very first paragraph of that letter also is like a mile of throat clearing of like, Trump is the worst thing that ever happened to the universe and we all oppose him and so on and so forth. So it did seem to me like they were posturing a little bit with that part of it as like, we are center-left Democrats. We're very much in the quote-unquote resistance. I don't know that Glenn would have been that comfortable with the first paragraph to begin with, but it kind of is language that would exclude somebody like him, because I don't think Glenn sees free speech as a partisan issue. I mean, this was primarily center-left people who signed this letter, with some exceptions, like, of course, Noam Chomsky. But I think that almost the way the letter was written was very much aimed at that kind of liberalish segment of society, whereas Glenn is more of a leftist, a left libertarian type guy. And I think that he having politics as radical as him on the letter would have been more validating, as well as having more conservatives on the letter, because there really wasn't anybody, like in 40 or 45% of America wasn't really represented on the letter talking about debate. So that would be, I think that's probably the most persuasive criticism I've seen of this letter, was that it seemed geared very much at that center-left portion of America rather than all of America. And I think that having someone like Glenn on there really would have boosted the case a lot.
I completely agree.
Yeah, and while we don't know for sure that Russiagate was the issue that made Glenn, too controversial to be a signatory on this letter, I do think it's interesting the way that Russiagate has played this role within the Democratic Party, within the left, especially among sort of, the liberal part of the Democratic Party, where if you say anything that's wrong on Russia, then it's the easiest thing in the world to dismiss you as a Kremlin agent. I mean, look at what they did to Tulsi Gabbard. Look at what Hillary Clinton said about Tulsi, right? She's a useful idiot. All of us who have been, outspoken in that regard have had those labels thrown at us, with basically the implication being that you shouldn't take anything that person says seriously, that they're not genuine actors, that, the approach that they're taking is all shaped by some nefarious forces that are below the surface. I see it very much as intrinsically linked to this whole conversation about censorship and allowing debate and free speech, so that you don't have, someone as prominent as Glenn or Matt Taibbi or others who were outspoken Russiagate critics on that letter, to me, is kind of alarming.
Yeah, well, part of this also is that, going beyond just the free speech part of it, it's also, this letter, I think, was supposed to signify that we want open debates, is that even if no one's speech is being constricted, I think a lot of people feel like they're under a culture of fear or a climate of fear where they have to only say one or two, dogmatic things. And one of those things at one point was that, Russia basically controlled the American election in 2016. And there were a lot of premises put out about their level of influence and what exactly happened that I don't think were questioned by a lot of people, because, if you did try to question them, your patriotism may be called into question, or you may be considered a conspiracy theorist. Now, if you look at this several years out, a lot of the people who were more skeptical of this, like Glenn, like Matt, they were right about a lot of it. And there were actually government excesses themselves against some certain people as part of the Russiagate investigation. But at the time, really, no one really wanted to talk about this except for a few people like the Glenns and the Taibis. And I think that, if you want, you can't just have people who are in kind of the mainstream standing up for free speech, because you don't have to defend anyone's right to speech or debate if they're already in the orthodoxy and everyone already likes them. Just like you don't have to make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies, right? You have to defend the speech of those who otherwise wouldn't have it, or who are actually under attack. And I think, that having more people who are skeptical of fiasco would have been one way to establish that principle.
So Zaid, now it's been a couple of weeks that we've been mired in letter discourse. You're a signatory, and I think you're somebody who actually stands up for true principle of free speech. What do you think the state of the debate is right now? Do you think the letter hurt, helped? What did it reveal? What do you think?
It probably helped a little bit, at least rally some people who felt maybe a little bit under siege over the past few months or years even. But I think that also it's kind of an elite place. It's just a debate that's kind of an elite place among like media people. I don't think the average American is paying that much attention to something like this. And fundamentally, I think that this sort of thing is about setting norms in our own place. We're in our own kind of spaces, like our workplaces, our universities, our media outlets. I think that that's where the more important work about promoting kind of a culture of open debate and a culture where people don't feel afraid to just speak very banal points of view or just to disagree or to raise a point in opposition. I think that's kind of on everyone. I don't think it can be done just with a letter. I think the letter was kind of a statement of principles, and now it's on everyone to enforce those statement of principles. And I think that was probably the other persuasive critique I saw of the letter, which is that some people that were on that letter had in the past had some censorious kind of views, like they had kind of tried to shut other people down and so on and so forth, which isn't any good. But I can tell you most people on that letter probably are not that way, but there were a few on there that were that way, and so that wasn't a great look. So
yeah. Finally, Zaid, I wanted to get your thoughts on something we've been discussing here. Andrew Sullivan made a lot of news when he announced he was resigning from or leaving or being forced out of New York Magazine. It seems like basically pushed out there, and is going back to having his own platform, Sully Dish, which is something that I've followed, and I look forward to reading him there with interest. But something Sagar and I have been talking about here is, on the one hand, it's a real loss when you have someone who's as smart a thinker, as brilliant a person, and as great a writer as Andrew Sullivan push down over heterodox views from mainstream press. On the other hand, it's kind of hopeful that, he's going to be fine. He's going to go and have his own platform, be able to have freedom and independence there. Same with, any number of people who were to get pushed down of that mainstream discourse would be able to find a platform and build a platform and do just fine. So just talk about that dynamic and what your reaction is to the news regarding Andrew Sullivan.
Yeah, so obviously I wouldn't say I was like a religious reader of Sullivan, but I'd probably checked on his blog for maybe 15 years, because he was one of the original kind of big political bloggers who really found traction starting a personal blog and getting picked up by institutions. And I think he has a place in history for that, even if I disagree with, 40 or 50% of the stuff that he writes or has written, because he tends to be on a more conservative side of things. In terms of what he does going forward, I think he says he has something like 50,000 subscribers already signed up for his newsletter. So it sounds like he'll be fine doing that. Mm-hmm. And given that he just writes columns, it seems like a really good format for him. He doesn't really need an institutional sponsor. What worries me more is if these publications start doing this reporting. For instance, if you want to report about, a huge increase in shootings in New York City, and that's seen as too sympathetic to police or too unsympathetic to Black Lives Matter, that newspapers start weighing on, they start leaning on you to not do that, to stick to one narrative, one line. I'm much more concerned on the reporting side, because we have many different ways to express our opinions now, including outside of established platforms. And I think that works great for someone like Sullivan. I'm much more worried about what happens when the news media starts saying, we don't really have to try to tell a balanced story about the complex place, which is the United States of America. We now have to comport all of our stories to critical race theory or something, which would be a real disaster in my opinion. And that would be much worse than what's happening with a few opinion people or high profile moving around.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point.
Yeah, important distinction there. Thank you so much, Zaid, as always. Great to see you.
Thanks, Ed.
You.
All right, next on Rising, there's mayhem in the city of Portland. There were unmarked federal agents on the streets there. What's going on? Ken Klippenstein is the D.C. correspondent for The Nation. He's been covering the story. He's next when Rising continues.